I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Mazda CX-30, one of the most popular small SUVs on sale here in Australia. And outside of Australia, it's a bit more of a niche proposition, but in today's video, I'm going to give you a review of the 2023 CX-30 and let you know what this crossover gets right, but also what it gets wrong, because here in Australia, more than 1 in 10 small SUVs sold is a CX-30. So evidently, quite a lot of you reckon that this little truck is getting a lot right. Now, the one I've got with me today is the G25 Astina all-wheel drive. It's about 45 grand before on-road costs, so not cheap. But the good news is that you can get a great CX-30 for a lot less money than this spec, and I'm going to reveal which spec I would buy later in this video. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below and the notification bell. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Direct. Jumping inside the CX-30, it's immediately obvious that the Astina model in particular is a lovely place to be. Now, this particular car has been optioned with pure white leather. Now, that's obviously a bit of a subjective choice. Not everyone wants a white leather interior, but it certainly lifts the luxe factor of this car and also works really nicely with the Sol Red Crystal paint outside. But almost all CX-30 specs have a black interior. The Astina is available with one, and then all the models that have cloth seats, which is about half the range, have a nice, supportive, comfortable cloth seat, some of them with power adjustment, some without. So if that feature matters to you, you do need to pick apart the CX-30 range quite carefully to make sure you're getting the features that matter. Now, I think the G20 Evolve spec is a really good balance in this range. It's got cloth seats, they're manually adjustable, but almost everything else you see here, with the exception of things like the sunroof and the Bose premium audio, are standard from quite a low level in the CX-30 lineup. So you don't actually have to spend a huge amount of money on this car to feel like you're getting a really good small SUV. So that's a bit of a tip. In terms of the tech in here, we've got an 8.8-inch screen. It's not a touchscreen, it's actually out of your reach even if you did want to touch it. So you use it with this scroll wheel down here. Now, I like that. On a bumpy road, it makes the screen a lot easier to control, but I get that some people want a touchscreen, and that's fine. There is Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in this system, but you have to plug your phone in, which is now starting to feel a bit old school in 2023. And you've got a mixed gauge cluster, 2 mechanical dials, and a digital screen in the center, which shows you your speed and distance to the car in front, but not a lot more than that. Plus a color heads-up display that you can see through polarized sunnies, which is really good. Storage is okay. We've got cup holders here, a bit of space ahead of the shifter, and then a cool adjustable armrest with a big box and 2 old school USB ports, and enough room for a decently sized water bottle in the door as well. Now, quality and materials are something Mazda is getting so right at the moment. Lovely leather wheel and shifter, but basically soft materials, plush materials everywhere, even down here. It's a much more expensive feeling cabin than something like a Volkswagen T-Roc, for instance, and I think a lot of people will love that about the CX-30. Jumping into the back of the CX-30, it's obvious that this isn't a massive crossover, but that's not really a problem, because very shortly Mazda will have 7 different SUVs on the market in Australia. So if you need something larger than this car, this is a brand that can cater to that. But if you are looking for a relatively compact vehicle with a slightly elevated driving position that an SUV promises, and you're only going to use this back seat occasionally, then this could be perfect. So for myself at 6 foot, sitting behind a chair adjusted for my driving position, I've got enough room. Headroom is actually good. Legroom, I've got enough of it, and toe room is impressive. Plus my legs are supported by this angled bench, which is great. There are air vents in the back of this spec. We've got a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders as well. No map pocket in front of me, but there is one over this side in case you're still carrying like a UBD. But material quality does take a bit of a step back in the backseat of the CX-30. Again, that's pretty normal for this segment and not really much of an issue. So as a backseat to chuck a couple of friends or a gym bag or something like that, this will get the job done just fine. Moving around the back now of this Sol Red Crystal CX-30, it's a good looking vehicle. I think most people would agree with that, though some people don't love the prominent cladding on this car. Well, if you go for black or machine grey, it does hide that cladding quite a bit. Now, the Astina has a powered tailgate, arguably not really necessary on such a small vehicle, but a convenience nonetheless. That gets out of your way and reveals a boot which measures 317 litres. To my eye, it looks a little bigger than that, but I think it comes down to the fact the boot floor is kind of high. If you lift that up, you do get a space saver spare underneath that, which is certainly a nice to have, but you're not getting cool tricks like you'd get in some other cars, like the ability to drop the back seats remotely. It's an okay space. Just make sure to test drive and try out this car and make sure it can fit everything you need to put in it, because it isn't massive. Now that the boot's closed, let's talk about the servicing and running costs and then go for a drive. So what's it going to cost to run and own a Mazda CX-30? Well, the fuel consumption is higher on the models with the G25 2.5 litre engine, and then higher again if you go for all-wheel drive. So that's something to keep in mind. This vehicle has both of those things, so in town it's actually pretty thirsty. I was only able to manage 10 litres per 100 kilometres urban, which is pretty bad for a small SUV, but on the highway it will settle down to 7.5, 8 litres per 100 Ks without too much coaxing. The fuel consumption is a lot better for the G20 model, the 2 litre. Obviously that's slower. It's only available with front wheel drive, but you're going to be able to get it down to more like 8.5 litres per 100 Ks in town. There is the X20 Skyactiv-X engine as well. That's quite a complicated engine, very frugal, but it's even more expensive to buy than this car. When it comes to servicing, you need to do it every year or 10,000 Ks. It'll cost you $1,762 over the first 5 years and 50,000 Ks. When it comes to insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,007 comprehensively insuring a new Mazda CX-30. Everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live and how you garage the car. And the warranty on the vehicle is 5 years with unlimited kilometers. So pulling away in the Mazda CX-30, there's an immediate kind of natural sense to the way this car drives. And I think that's why a lot of Australians quite like Mazdas, is that they are easy cars to drive. They're a little bit noisier in terms of their engines than some rivals, and that's because they don't have turbocharged engines. At least the CX-30 doesn't have a turbo here in Australia, but what it does have is quite a lot of verve and get up and go, especially if you choose it with the 2.5 litre engine, which this particular car has. It's got 139 kilowatts of power and 252 Newton meters of torque, which is pretty competitive for this segment. Although we put the car through performance testing and it was really only middling. It gave us a 8.5 second 0 to 100 time, which is, you know, pretty much mid-pack for small SUVs, maybe quicker than some, but with such a large engine, you do kind of expect that it'll give you a little bit more performance. And overseas, you do have that option because Mazda sells this car with a turbocharged 2.5 litre engine in the US and some other markets, but sadly, we've never received that car here. So if you want a Mazda SUV with higher performance than the CX-30, you're gonna need to go for the CX-5, which you can option with a turbo petrol engine or a turbo diesel as well. But for what it's worth, for what it is, the CX-30 delivers nice levels of performance. The same is also true of the way the CX-30 rides. It's going to be a little bit more sporty and firm than what some buyers I think are looking for. There are cushier vehicles in this segment, vehicles like the Skoda Karoq for instance, but it's certainly not offensive. And one way to make the ride more comfortable in this car is to go for the entry-level Pure model, which has 16-inch wheels and a lot chunkier tires. But even on these optional 18-inch wheels, the ride quality is still fine. I think for most people, the all-wheel drive system isn't really going to be worth it, because unless you live in somewhere that gets a lot of snow, for instance, you're not going to be tapping into this car's all-wheel drive system all that often. Now, one thing you will be able to take advantage of in the CX-30 though, is the really nice handling of this vehicle. Because it's a little sportier than some, meaning it does have a slightly firmer ride quality, the dividend is that it's got really good agility and pleasant handling. You can really tip this vehicle into the corners and drive it quite quickly down a country road and feel the sort of depth of engineering and talent in this chassis. It doesn't fall apart like some rivals tend to do. It encourages you to be a keen driver, and you can kind of feel that Mazda really does care about driving dynamics in all its cars, not just the MX-5 sports car, for instance. The steering only has one mode. It's well weighted and it's delivered through this pleasant leather steering wheel with paddle shifters on some models as well, so you can take control of the 6-speed automatic transmission, but you don't really need to, because the auto in this car is well tuned, well sorted. It's making the right decisions. It revs out the engine if it needs to. It doesn't have a turbo, so sometimes it's going to have to do that, but most of the time you're just able to poodle around town comfortably in this vehicle without thinking much of it. One thing I would call attention to though is that the braking performance of the CX-30 wasn't so good in our testing. We weren't able to get it to stop in less than 40 meters, which is not as good as we've seen from some other rivals. So working on the strength of the brakes is something for Mazda to address in future. Some other bits and bobs, the refinement is pretty decent apart from when the engine has to be revved out if you're merging onto a highway or overtaking on a country road, when it tends to be a little bit loud in the cabin. And meanwhile, one of the best parts of the Astina is that it does get the CX-30's vision safety package as standard. So you've got things like cruising and traffic support, which is low speed autonomy. You're getting a 360-degree parking camera that works really well. But it's important to note that all CX-30s have standard AEB, autonomous emergency braking, that operates both going forward and in reverse. You're also getting blind spot monitoring and adaptive cruise control across the range, which is good to see. So at the beginning of this video, I said I'd reveal which CX-30 spec I would actually buy if it was my own money. Well, I would consider the Astina if you wanted a little luxury crossover that's less expensive to buy than an Audi, BMW or Mercedes. The leather, the Bose stereo, the sunroof, they're all nice to have, but actually the best value is much closer to the entry point of the CX-30 line. If you can drive a manual, Mazda makes an awesome manual base model CX-30, which is 30 grand plus on-road costs. Great depth of engineering at a price like that. If you don't want a manual, that's fine. I would also continue to check out the base model, but also the G20 Evolve and G20 Touring, both of which are really good at what they do at a much lower price than the Astina. Very keen to know your opinions though, so let me know down below this video what you think of the CX-30. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.